I think this is why I also said yes to helping to co-present this, because music and sound has a way of healing and bringing together and transcending so many different boundaries and barriers that we put up. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to invite Dr. Martha to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. I just need to get a clicker and hopefully some slides. Oh, I've jumped ahead. Can we go back? Yes. Hi, it's a real pleasure to be with you today, out of the academic box and into the real world. So, as an anthropologist and a psychologist, I am fascinated by people. As a human, I'm fascinated by people. I geek out over thoughts, I'm nerdy about feelings, and I'm obsessed with understanding why we do the weird things we do as people. And one of those weird things is staying up all night and dancing until we're exhausted and take days to recover. It struck me for the last 2 decades of personal experience and research that rave is actually a really beautiful lens to understand the richness of human experience. I will warn you now that we're going to time travel a good million years or so in the next 10 or 15 minutes, so please bear with me. And if you need a bit of a lifeline, the strand, the thread to hold on to here is ritual. In rave, the DJ, like we saw in Nonsky's talk, the DJ becomes shaman. The sounds that the speakers is the totem. And the ravers, the attendees, whether it's a free party, a festival, a gathering in the woods listening to nightingales, potentially, the people become the pilgrims, the congregation, coming together to celebrate themselves and the community. So I'm going to take us back a little bit. Sat around the fire in our ancestral past, we're surrounded by dangerous predators. We've got warring tribes to the other side. We depend on each other for our survival. Really, we can't clothe ourselves, we can't build shelter, we can't keep a fire in without one another. If not in the very immediate, then at least from the wisdom from our elders to understand these very varied lands that we're suddenly entering into as we spread and evolve up all the way through Africa and across Asia and down through America. We have such amazing territories that we encounter, and to understand how to live in them, we're all one human, but we have very different places we live in. To be able to live in these different places, we require culture, and that's the wisdom of our elders. So how do we know that we belong to a culture and that we should listen to it? How do we know we can trust, really depend on those around us? Well, we use ritual. And around the fireside, there's another rhythm. A rhythm as simple as footsteps. It's the heartbeat. The one heartbeat that connects us all. The heartbeat we all hear in the womb. Not just humans, but all mammals. This one heartbeat that unifies us, I would argue, is the foundational beat of rave. And we'll come back to that. So, if we're thinking about this very deep and ancient past, why think about something as seemingly fleeting or transient as rave? Well, I argue that it's actually really very durable. As a subculture, it's at least 40 years old, and that's pretty good going for any subculture. On a psytrance dance floor, you might get 3 generations of one family stomping it out together. And this durability is kind of poignant in its brief history in terms of the human story. So starting in really the late 80s, early 90s with the New Age traveler scene, mixed with the club scene coming out of Ibiza and other parts of the world, and drawing on a kind of history from the beatniks in the 60s, rave had to be very durable because quite swiftly in 1994, we got the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. And this meant that gatherings of 20 or more people could be dispersed forcibly if they were listening to repetitive beats. It's weird, isn't it? Specifically, if those events were unlicensed or playing music, not my words, likely to cause annoyance. what's really strange about this is for all of human history, unlicensed music is all we've ever done. So it's really in the last 30 years or so that we've had this very strange and strong restriction on gathering and listening to music. There's an equivalent in America, the Rave Act, a bit later on, probably because there's so much more land that these kind of gatherings could be on the edges more easily, and that's reducing Americans' vulnerability to ecstasy. Specifically, event organizers have to do everything they can to prevent people from taking drugs, or their equipment can be seized. And equipment really is seized. So many people on the free party scene will invest thousands or tens of thousands of pounds in their sound systems, in these totems, and people will protest, often peacefully, to protect their community assets. So rave has spread all over the world. The free party scene, they've kind of split, they've become more commercial and more underground. But from the mountains of Utah to disused airfields in France, this is a picture from French Tech, a Technival in France just this year on the right. The one on the left is from about 94, so spanning quite a good amount of time and space. Even in the desert. This picture's from Iran, where, as I understand it, rave is illegal, no surprises, but even listening to techno or similar music on your headphones or owning a record, even that is illegal. And what amazes me is that this durability, this persistence to engage in the culture is not entirely about the music. It's about each other. It's about the people. It's about having gone to the ends of the earth and come out the other side with your crew. I've been to parties in disused bank vaults, in abandoned barns, in valleys, under bridges, in tunnels. And by going to the very edges of civilization, by leaving the civilized, you engage in something more intuitive. You enter a liminal space. It's a beautiful concept. It's the magical between, where your norms and conventions are left behind, and you enter into something sacred, intentionally held in a communal space. Whether that's a disused airfield or it's a beautiful church, doesn't necessarily matter. The point is you've set aside a special space to enact community and togetherness, to belong, to have that magical bubbling up between people. Now, to try and understand this sort of deep permanence of rave culture and coming together and the ephemeral sort of fluttering up that happens between people, I delved into what I've termed the 4 Ds. This is drugs, dance, sleep deprivation or darkness, and drumming. Now, these are evolutionary ancient. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from today, it's that rave is nothing new. It's at least 100,000 years old. So we'll start with the drugs. The mushroom man, as he's sometimes known, on the left, this is the earliest archaeological evidence of psychedelic drugs. This one's from Algeria, about 9,000 years ago. There are many other depictions like this. The mind is sort of an expanse, or maybe it's a spirit in mushroom form. Dance, about 40,000 years ago, approximately. Proto-dance, moving in synchrony, is also powerful. We find it in courtship displays in birds, for instance. But dance that's symbolic, dance that takes on your cultural values and represents who you are, probably appeared more like 40,000 years ago. And again, we detect that from the archaeological record. Dance is in every culture in the world, and there's no escaping it, even when it's made illegal. Babies do it. You can't stop babies dancing. They tend to dance before they can walk. And in fact, sort of sing and hum before they can talk. Sleep deprivation, this staying up all night business, is a funny one because for many human cultures, sleeping at night and being awake in the day is not the sort of static binary thing we have in this part of the world. There are many different ways to have sleep patterns. But this manipulation of darkness, the coming together around a fire, or using strobe lights, it doesn't really matter, probably appeared about 1 million years ago when we got control of fire by harnessing forest fires and learning to manipulate it ourselves. There's beautiful anthropological theories worked by Richard Wrangham and others that gathering around that collective fire and having to keep it in was the first time that we had pair bonding. That's mates forging a connection in a way that we only could have done originally with our mothers, holding that intense eye contact and forming a lot of trust. And finally, the drumming, it extends the 1 million sort of sell-by date I gave us, but I'm giving 5 million years to the drumming because we share it with chimpanzees, and it's likely that our most common recent ancestor with the chimpanzees also had some kind of percussive communication. So that's about 5 million years old. Chimps will bang on roots, and they use branches or even stones to express themselves through rhythm, usually around emotion. Now, the drums in their modern form with their sort of skin, that probably also appeared about 40,000 years ago. We actually heard that in the Nightingale talk, along with dance. And there's one argument that this explosion, the cognitive revolution it's called, around 40, 60,000 years ago, was just preceded by the cultivation and the harvesting of psychedelic drugs. Whether you believe that theory or not, all 4 of the Ds certainly induce altered states of consciousness. From the drugs, which I don't need to really explain, to ecstatic dance or Sufism, the sleep deprivation, the power of flickering lights, and there's a talk coming later which will go into that, I think, and the drumming. Some of the most profound psychedelic journeys I've had have been through shamanic drumming, stone cold sober. And when you get all 4 of these Ds together, the potential for transformation, for ripping apart who you thought you were and becoming, stepping into a new identity is really profound. And when you have that fraying at the edges of who you once were, potentially in this sacred place where you've set aside the norms and conventions, you've adorned yourself in costume, when you come into that transformative space and your sense of autobiographical self is frayed, there's a chance to incorporate the rest of the group into your sense of who you are, to fuse self and group. So I decided to do what any good scientist does, and that's collect a load of data. So I contacted several hundred people who'd been to a rave or a free party in the last 5 years. We'll start at the bottom of this picture, and I'm telling you now, this is the most attractive figure in any really boring academic journal. So the bottom 4, the 4 Ds, the more people engaged in them, so the higher they got, the longer they stayed up, the more they danced, the more intense the beat, the more they had feelings of awe and wonder, particularly if they had an open personality. There's a bit of circularity there because we also know that psychedelics feed into creating more open personalities. That sense of awe has several facets, all of which were important in this model. Those feelings of awe led to the transformation I talked about, and in turn, a group bonding, a fusion of self and group, identity fusion. And in turn, all of that led to charitable giving, specifically to charities who were helping people having bad trips at festivals. It didn't help with generic sort of national aid charities. It was specifically to help other people within the culture. Now, there was one thing in this big structural equation modeling that we didn't predict. And first of all, it's really neat that this worked out in the real world because big models like this are quite hard to control, the tons of things going on in life. So we were amazed it worked completely. But that red line between the 4 Ds and personal transformation, that means there was a negative effect. So if you engage in the 4 Ds, but you don't have any awe, you're not held in a ritual space, it's anti-transformation. You feel like crap. You've been up all night. You've gotten really high, but there's no community holding, no expansiveness coming out of the intention to engage in a meaningful ritual. So I want to think, what happens in the cityscape of tomorrow? What happens when we can cut through all the noise, cut through the police acts and the policies, and come back to that primordial heartbeat? What happens when we can unify and come together through that one shared beat we all have as all of humanity and dig into our roots, the ritual of rave? So I invite you to imagine a space in our future cityscapes, maybe our near future cityscapes, where we can come together and we can dance and we can engage in altered states of consciousness if we wish, We don't have to do all the 4Ds at once. Maybe it's repurposed churches. Maybe it's a space in the park. But it's a space where everyone is accepted on their terms to come together. Because imagine if that model that I ran had had people from all walks of life in a city come together. Their charitable giving, their altruism, their sense of oneness would be to a much bigger group than just other ravers. It could be with the whole city. It could be with the whole country. Eventually, if we get it right, we could have rave embracing all of humanity through that one heartbeat. I'm Dr.Martha Newson, and find me on the socials. Thank you very much.